Okay, here we go again. So, what are we talking about today, Jim?
Today, we are talking about 10 Scrum myths that frequently come up, and we are going to debunk them.
These are myths which keep on coming up. They will not die, and we'll just keep on making videos.
Let's do it. So, Duncan, what is our number 10 Scrum myth?
Number 10, in reverse order, the sprint review is just a demo.
Just a demo. Why is it not just a demo?
So obviously a presentation of what you've done during the sprint or a demo of what you've done during the sprint, absolutely fine. That makes sense, but that's not the purpose of the sprint review. Sprint review is an opportunity to inspect and adapt your overall plan for the product and adjust the product backlog. But a lot of people just use it for a demo, and then meeting over, everyone walks away.
A demo is one-way communication. The sprint review is an informal event designed to elicit feedback. It's two-way communications. If we're just doing one-way communication, we're just demoing our stuff, we're not learning anything. We've not got any opportunity to inspect and or adapt.
Okay, and number 9 of Scrum myths is...
In Scrum, there are best practices, and one of those best practices is 2-week sprints.
Surely not.
Surely not. 2-week sprints do seem natural, and they are a good fit for some people. However, the sprint length is basically the length of our feedback loop. How long we can go before checking in with our customers to ensure that we're still on the right path, to ensure we're still building the right stuff. Now, for some teams, that might be 2 weeks. For other teams, market conditions might change very quickly, and we might need shorter sprints. Or perhaps we're working in a very stable environment, and we can have longer sprints without checking in with our customers. Maybe our product's simple. Maybe our product is complex. Maybe our team is mature. Maybe our team is newly formed. And any number of other things affect our decision for what our sprint length is.
What works for one team, one person, might not necessarily work for another. And there are no best practices in Scrum.
And there's a bit of an anchoring effect. If what we've always done is 2-week sprints, then probably what we'll always do is 2-week sprints, and we won't know whether different sprint lengths work better for us or work worse for us. It's important to try out new stuff, to run little experiments. If we think perhaps a 1-week sprint might be a good idea, let's try it. Let's find out.
Nice.
Okay, number 8 on our list, Duncan.
The scope of a sprint is fixed after sprint planning. A lot of people are still stuck with this idea that once you've planned a sprint, you've committed everything that you're going to deliver for that sprint. And if you know anything about complexity, that has to be nonsense. It makes no sense to think that we can perfectly plan even a sprint ahead. So although we commit to the sprint goal, our plan for the sprint is just a forecast, our best guess of what we think we can do. If we need to adjust the scope, the team will adjust the scope.
You look confused.
That's my face.
Make it stop.
And that leads us on to point number 7, which is...
Sprint goals are optional. True or false, Duncan?
I would say that would be a
Scrum myth. So sprint goals are difficult. They can be challenging depending on how much variety of work the team is doing. It can be very challenging to find or phrase a sprint goal which pulls the team in one unifying direction, to encourage them to work together rather than on separate initiatives. However, that is the benefit of the sprint goal. We're going to get the team rowing in the same direction by giving them a common focus to encourage collaboration and creativity. That is why, as per the Scrum Guide 2020, sprint goals are mandatory, whether we like it or not.
Yep, and they were mandatory before that. Without having a sprint goal, there's the danger of the team not acting as a cohesive unit. Lots of individuals all working on their own individual little things. So sprint goals are not optional, they're mandatory, they are part of Scrum.
Without a sprint goal, we're just herding cats.
Herding cats. And Scrum myth 6. There's a maximum size of the Scrum team, whether it be the Scrum team has to be between 2 and 7, or a maximum of 9, or the Scrum team can't be bigger than 10. These are all effectively myths. These numbers were associated with Scrum at various points, but at no point were they seen as a maximum size for the Scrum team. Currently, this idea of a Scrum team is typically 10 or fewer people. That's just an observation. Previously, we talked about a recommended size for the development team. But what's important is that our teams are cross-functional and self-managing. There's no absolute maximum for the size of the team.
We're not the Scrum police, Duncan.
We might be if we move on to Scrum myth number 5.
That user stories and epics are what our product backlog must be comprised of. User stories, right? Scrum, Agile equals daily scrums and user stories. That's how it works. So a product backlog should be transparent, ordered, and visible to our stakeholders. But how it's comprised is entirely up to the team. Again, whatever works best for the product. An epic is simply a generic term for any piece of work that's too large to get done in one iteration. Now, if teams want to structure their work in epics, that's great. If teams want to phrase their work as user stories, as a customer of Chicago, I want to be able to buy a hot dog. That's great as well. However, there might be other ways to phrase their product backlog that makes more sense for that team in that context. They're certainly worth considering, but not mandatory.
Absolutely not mandatory and not part of Scrum, which takes us on quite nicely to Scrum myth number 4. Scrum makes you go faster. This probably comes from Jeff's infamous book, Twice the Work, Half the Time. And this idea that Scrum allows us to drive our teams to be a lot more productive. Now, there is some science and research behind this, but if your takeaway from that is that Scrum will magically just make your teams go faster, then you're going to be disappointed.
Going faster is a byproduct of doing Scrum. Going faster is what happens when Scrum teams focus on delivering value, removing impediments, working together as a team. Going faster isn't the goal. Going faster is what happens when we deliver value better.
And that takes us nicely onto
probably the most important metric in Scrum is velocity. Velocity is how we predict how much work the team are going to be able to do, and our goal is to raise the velocity that a team can achieve. That is absolutely not true.
I could feel my face like burning with anger even as you were saying.
So a lot of teams get hung up on velocity. It's a nice, attractive metric, velocity. It's easy to get hooked on that. Velocity is simply a measure of how much work the team have done in the sprint. It's a looking backward measure. It's not a target. It's not a goal. It can be used to predict or forecast how much work the team are likely to get done in future sprints. It's going so well too. It can be used to forecast how much work a team may get done in future sprints if everything stays the same. But it's not a target, it's simply a forecastable metric.
So why do we think so many organizations are hung up on velocity and are constantly trying to drive their team to up their velocity metrics?
Value over velocity. Velocity is dangerous. It's an attractive metric to get hung up on, but resist the temptation to get hung up on the pursuit of velocity.
And moving on to Scrum myth number 2. If anyone still believes this, hopefully we can debunk it. The Scrum Master is the boss of the Scrum team who makes all the decisions. I hope no one believes this anymore. The Scrum Master is a servant leader for the team, or a true leader who serves the team and the organization. They facilitate, they remove impediments, they cause the removal of impediments. But the last thing they are is a traditional command and control boss of the team.
Because Scrum teams solve complex adaptive problems, and command and control isn't a great way to solve complex adaptive problems with unknowns. Command and control is good for complicated problems. Servant leadership, embracing collaboration and creativity is a great solution for complex problems. Do you think that comes from the name again? Just like velocity sounds attractive and sprints sound fast, Scrum Master sounds like the boss.
I think it's a good time to move on to the last and most important myth to be debunked, which is
The daily Scrum is a status reporting and micromanagement event.
and obviously it's not that.
It's not that at all. It's the team's opportunity to plan their work for the next 24 hours, to inspect their progress towards the sprint goal and adapt their plan for work accordingly. It's by the dev team for the dev team. If management want to know how we're going, what our status is, they can ask the team anytime. Just not disrupting the daily stand-up to make that happen.
So how would you feel about stakeholders and product owners attending the daily Scrum now that we're all working in this distributed remote way?
So long as they don't disrupt the purpose of the event and the event still achieves its intended outcome within the time box, why not? That could work well for the team.
Nice. And that is yet another Scrum Chat. Myths debunked.
Scrum out.
Okay, Jim, why is it important? Why is it so important that Scrum Chat historically debunk these myths?
Scrum gets a bad reputation sometimes because of the misinformation, the myths that have been propagated for a long time since Scrum's been around. And it gets a bit of an unfair bad name from people just doing Scrum that isn't Scrum or attributing things to being Scrum that actually aren't Scrum. Scrum is simple to understand, difficult to master. It's a lightweight framework to help teams solve complex adaptive problems. Nothing more, nothing less. A lot of the myths around this don't help that and don't promote good use of Scrum to help teams deliver value.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That, Duncan, Scrum Chat. That was lightning in a bottle, Duncan.